Hey guys, and welcome to another video. So today I'm going to be doing an unboxing and a first thoughts review of a new product that I am going to be trying. This product is Acryla Gouache from Holbein. I got this set from dickblick.com and it was rather good valued. It was under $20 for a set of 12. And these are 11ml tubes of Acryla Gouache. Holbein is a Japanese company. They make all sorts of art supplies from oil paints to watercolor paints to gouache and acrylic gouache. This is all in Japanese on the casing. I don't speak Japanese, so I have no idea what it says. I'm assuming it's describing the product inside. I have previously used their watercolor range and have had a mixed review of it, and I've also found other artists that agree and maybe don't get on quite so well with their watercolor range. When it comes to their gouache and acrylic gouache, I've heard different stories completely. There are rave reviews about their gouache and acrylic gouache, and I must admit, from what I've seen so far from other reviews, their acrylic gouache and gouache is amazing compared to their watercolor line. So here they are, all 12 colours in a nice little box. That's one thing Japan are very good at, is being kind of cute and organised, and this definitely lives up to that. So, a closer look at the tube. It says the name in English and in Japanese, and it says acrylic gouache on it in English. It says the size of the tube, and it has the Holbein logo at the bottom. And on the back it has the light fastness rating and the pigment information, along with some other bits in Japanese. And on the front as well there is a colour swatch, hopefully trying to match the colour in the tube. They are screw cap tubes, and there's not a seal underneath that like a little foil seal like one maybe would expect for this style of tubing. So acrylic gouache sets permanently once it's dried, so I didn't want to use a normal palette for this. So I made my own makeshift stay wet palette by wetting a paper towel and putting some greaseproof paper on top of that. The greaseproof paper will absorb a little bit of the water, keeping the paint moist and not drying out too quickly. That is the main difference between traditional gouache and acrylic gouache, is that the paints do set permanent, they don't lift. So I'm going to pour some paint out and swatch all the colours. First thing I noticed when pouring the paint out was it is a quite soft runny paint. It reminded me slightly of the Sennelier watercolour paint, that kind of consistency. It's definitely a very different consistency from traditional gouache, which is usually pretty thick and chalky. So the colours that came in this set were carmine, scarlet, deep yellow, lemon yellow, light green, titanium white, viridian, ultramarine, sky blue, violet, burnt sienna and jet black. I painted a solid square of colour, and then I did a transparency test on the black lines. I painted concentrated watercolour at the top and then bled the rest of it out like watercolour. Traditional gouache and acrylic gouache is often described as the hybrid between acrylic and watercolour, and you should be able to use both in either way. As this paint is different from traditional gouache and a little bit runnier, I didn't need very much water to get the paint to move. I literally just dampened my brush and mixed it in with the paint, so hardly any water was used at all. And the paint flowed and moved quite nicely on paper, and it moved when really wet in the transparency test. One thing that I noticed and that did surprise me was how the paints behaved when they were really wet and used like watercolor. They flowed really well in water when blending out. This was a surprise because when I tried their watercolor range, I found the paint didn't really move very much. I will test this a little bit further later on in the video to see if that is true. On the box it said that the colours are all opaque. During the opacity test I found that that wasn't quite true. On one layer of paint you can still see the black line at its thickest, just about though. It would probably take 2, maybe 3 layers for full opacity. The only colour that was fully opaque was the jet black. All of the colours were quite nice and bright, and is what I would expect from a high quality paint. The paints were very nice and they laid down very well. They were nice and smooth, and there wasn't too much streaks in most of the paints. The ultramarine blue did also have some granulation when put out in a wash. So far I am definitely impressed with the Holbein Acryla Gouache. I've been looking to try acrylic gouache for a little while. I have tried traditional gouache and I found it quite difficult to use. It's chalky and it's hard to find a good consistency to paint with. Paint too runny with it and it's just like painting with watercolour, which is a bit pointless in having the paint. Paint too thickly with it and it can be difficult to blend and achieve desired results. I find that traditional gouache is not true to the name of a hybrid between watercolour and acrylic. I find it a bit more like oil paint. However, the acrylic gouache I feel embodies that description. I do feel that it's a very good hybrid of acrylic and watercolour paint. Next up I did some colour mixing. I did 2 colour wheels, one using the warm primary colours and the second using the cool versions. It was a challenge not to add too much water to this paint, as I didn't want it to be too much like watercolour and I wanted a nice finish to the paint. However, if you don't add enough water to this paint it can be a tad streaky, so finding that right balance is going to take some practice. The colours all mixed very nicely and very cleanly. I got no muddy mixtures whatsoever, which is really good. I'm definitely getting on a lot better with their acrylic gouache range as opposed to their watercolour range. I've never had experience before with a product like this. I tried traditional gouache, I've had a play for 5 minutes with acrylics, and I mostly use watercolour. This is a very good blend between the two, and I can't wait to see what it's like to paint with, especially as it's permanent, so I get the painting feel of gouache, but it will not blend out nicely and it won't look glossy like acrylic does, and it also will blend a lot nicer. Now this set is not as much of a bargain as maybe I previously said. A couple of colours in this set aren't very light fast, namely the violet and the scarlet. These are both fugitive colours, being PR9 and BV1 and BV15. These are very fugitive and they may fade. Acrylic gouache is a medium that's rather under the radar. I believe there's only one other company, to my knowledge, that makes acrylic gouache, and that is Turner's. In comparison with the Holbein Acryla Gouache, Turner's is definitely a lot more cheaper. On average, about a third of the price Turner's is to Holbein. Holbein is about £5.30 for a 20ml tube, whereas the Turner's Acryla Gouache is about £1.80 per 20ml tube. I haven't tried the Turner's gouache, however I've been told by people who have that it's a very nice gouache, but Holbein is just slightly nicer. I really like how all the colour mixes turned out. They're all very just nice looking, they're all very matte, and they're all very bright and vibrant. This is a problem I had when mixing with Holbein, that sometimes it would lose that vibrancy with mixing. But this doesn't seem to be the problem with the Acryla Gouache. I cannot wait to work more with this medium and see what I can achieve. I do follow one or two people that do use Acryla Gouache as a main medium. I think the main one that I know and the biggest one that I know is Nina Sprout. I believe she is on Instagram, Etsy and Patreon. I'll try and leave a link to her work down below so you can see what results can be achieved with this. There will be a follow-up video with this one where I do a painting demonstration and I give you more of my final thoughts on how the gouache worked and how it behaved when mixing. Because one major difference with this between watercolour and all other paint media is that you have to rely on black and white for your values. In watercolour we don't have to really worry about that too much. The water makes the paint lighter and then we just use a complementary colour to darken the value of that colour. You can use a complementary colour with acrylic gouache, but you can also use colours like black. But you definitely do need to use white to get a lighter value, as if you add too much water then you'll just lose the intensity of that paint. I did do a transparency test for the black properly because on the other page it was a black marker, it didn't really show up with the black paint. So I painted it yellow swatch and painted black over it, and it was fully opaque. And the colour is also fully dry. It doesn't lift end at all after it's dry. I know there is another product on the market called Aquila, which I think is liftable up to about 20 minutes to half an hour after you've painted it, and then it's fully set. So I did wonder if there was some kind of leeway with that. I also did some dispersion tests to see how it dispersed, and I also compared it to the watercolour, which we're about to see. One more important thing I'd like to mention is gouache and acrylic gouache works better if you use a synthetic brush rather than a sable brush, as it's a bit of a thicker paint and it could damage the bristles of your expensive brushes, as paint could get stuck in there, and when it dries it will dry permanently, it won't wash off like watercolour does. So here is the testing with the Holbein Watercolor. I've tried to match the colour as close as I could, so I'm using yellow deep, viridian hue and burnt sienna as well in the watercolour range. They are different pigments to the acrylic gouache range, but still they're similar in hue. And the acrylic gouache is there on the left hand side for the yellow, and you'll see it moves instantly in water and flows exceptionally well, especially compared to the watercolour. I've swapped it round and the watercolour paint is on the left now for the viridian and the burnt sienna, and you can see that the viridian hardly moves in the water, as opposed to the acrylic gouache, which will move quite a lot. And the same thing happened with the burnt sienna. I find this slightly odd, as watercolour paint is made to move through water more so than acrylic gouache. So this is very kind of strange for me. I have really enjoyed this new experience of this new medium. If anybody has any suggestions or recommendations on how to use paint a little bit more, or suggestions for anything I should paint or look at in the next video, then please leave them down in the comment section below. I did do a rub test to see if the colour would come off at all. I went over it with a wet brush and nothing. I rubbed as well over a dry colour, and a little bit of colour did come up on the tissue. So that's it for this video, and hopefully you will join me in the next one. So hopefully I'll see you again. So take care everybody, and bye bye.